Welcome. You're listening to Beyond the Textbook. Today's episode is titled Blackfoot Language Through Lenses and is brought to you by Communication and Media Studies 591. Today, we'll be listening and learning, exploring the Blackfoot language through different lenses. This is Ember and Zillin, broadcasting out of CJSW.
In the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we would like to take this moment to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. We would also like to acknowledge that we are recording this podcast episode at the University of Calgary, located on land near the confluence of the Bow and Elbow rivers. Today, this land, widely known as the City of Calgary, is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3.
Thank you for joining us. In today's episode, we'll be exploring how language plays a powerful role in preserving cultural values and identity within Indigenous communities. To Indigenous communities, language is more than just words. It's a way of connecting deeply to the land, to their ancestors, and to each other. Through stories and personal experiences, we intend to explore how Indigenous languages uniquely capture these values.
So, our interest in this topic initially came about from an experience we shared as a group during a Blackfoot name ceremony. Before the ceremony started, we had a discussion with a classmate from Indigenous Studies 415 about the Blackfoot language and the storytelling that's conveyed through the use of it.
We found it really interesting that everything is alive in the Blackfoot language. For example, the rocks, water, and mountains are all alive and breathing in the language because that's the Indigenous ways of thinking.
It was actually such an eye-opener to realize that language can capture not only ideas, but entire ways of seeing and relating to the world. And that's exactly what we want to explore today. We have a special guest who will share their perspective on how language plays a role in sustaining cultural heritage and community values across generations. So today, we have Douglas with us in the studio, who has a deep background in communications and media. He started in Indigenous journalism and later took on in radio, TV, and film, including spending almost 8 years with CTV Calgary. He's also been actively involved in community event planning and outreach.
My name is Douglas Winnipeg. I'm from Siksika Nation, which is a Blackfoot reserve about an hour east of Calgary on the Trans-Canada, near Galician, Alberta. I am a combined degree communications and engineering student at the University of Calgary. To connect it with language, I should say that I'm not a great speaker of Blackfoot, and I'm not like a scholar in Blackfoot. I guess just tacit knowledge, just growing up in the community, knowing a lot of elders, doing a lot of community engagement. But as of right now, I think my language skills are kind of the kind of language skills you would have when you talk to your grandparents, because my grandparents spoke to me in Blackfoot.
Yeah, I find it really interesting that your language skills come from communicating with your grandmother, as that's similar to my own experience. For me, it's mostly what I've grown up using at home for basic daily communication, but I know outside of the household it can get kind of tricky with the technical terms and less familiar concepts. Was there a specific moment or experience that was a turning point for your passion for learning more about the language?
You know, you kind of hit teenage years and you're kind of rebelling against things, and I very much didn't want to learn the language. I guess wanting to learn the language, wanting to learn more about my culture comes from that, because I see the problems on the res, and so becoming an engineer is kind of a means to tackle that.
Thank you for that. I think that's wonderful. I love that you're taking your experiences and what you've seen around you and seeing what you can do to contribute towards the community. So now I'd like to learn a little bit more about the historical and cultural context of Indigenous languages. How would you compare the usage of the language now as to when your grandparents were growing up or when your parents were growing up?
You know, we have entire days, Truth and Reconciliation Days and Orange Shirt Days. These are all connected to the history of the residential schools, the history of the mistreatment and the marginalization of the Blackfoot people specifically. And so my grandparents grew up in a world where there were multiple generations of Blackfoot who had been put into residential schools where they were not allowed to speak their names. I will say that even in my grandparents' time, the language was a lot more prevalent, but it was also dying because of those generations of people who had gone through the residential school. And, even though the residential schools are gone and done, systemic destruction of our language are still here. To compare it to now, I should say that all languages go through cycle. And right now we are seeing a movement to what could be described as a new Blackfoot language. Like, for instance, there's a specific word, Getomatsin, and it means see you later. When you talk to a Blackfoot elder, no Blackfoot elder says Getomatsin. But if you talk to a young person my age or younger, and they'll say Getomatsin, it's kind of like this Blackfoot slang that the new generation has taken.
Have you ever thought that the emergence of new ways of using language will somehow diminish the traditional way of language speaking?
A few years ago, I should say, that I actually did actively worry that in my lifetime the language would disappear altogether. And I was talking with somebody, and I came to the conclusion that that's not possible. And that gives me a lot of solace. It gives me some solace in the fact that the Blackfoot language will outlive me and outlive my kids. And the reason why it will outlive me is because the Blackfoot language is a ceremonial language. It's kind of like Latin in the sense that as long as the ceremonies keep going, some languages never leave the ceremonial stage, and that changes the way we use the language. And so Siksika Nation does have a problem with this idea that it's a ceremonial language, so it won't go away, but its ceremony and everyday use are two very separate things. And so we need to, as a Blackfoot language, we need to start developing a more everyday use Blackfoot in order for us to take ownership of it and to make it so that it becomes an everyday in your household language. And that's the goal and hope of many Blackfoot peoples.
So do you find that, I know you mentioned the new verbiage almost being considered slang, do you find that it would be a good way to incorporate it into daily use for the younger generations to come? To promote different uses of the language and the various ways you can speak it?
I think so. If the language is naturally moving somewhere, I think it's counterproductive to try to change it. At some point, we're going to need to start finding these words and saying, let's make a new word. And that's what languages are doing, like in Hebrew. And Hebrew is a great example, actually, because in the 19th century, Hebrew didn't exist anymore. And it was only a handful of scholars language scholars who brought it back from the dead. And now 9 million people speak Hebrew as a language, as a first language, right? I know it seems a little silly, but we need to start adding words to everyday use, and some of that will be slang, right? And that's just kind of how it is. The natural progression of all languages do that, and so yeah, so hopefully we'll be dropping some new Blackfoot words very soon.
So I'm just wondering, when you have daily conversations with your Blackfoot friends or family, like your grandparents or parents, do you mix Blackfoot with English? I'm just curious because it reminds me of how in Hong Kong, the older generation, like my grandma, would actually mix other Chinese dialects with Cantonese. While, Gen Z like me often mix Cantonese with English. I would actually put the English word like in a sentence when I'm speaking Cantonese. Do you find something similar happens to you?
Definitely. There are people kind of like me where I know a little bit of the language and I know I can listen to a little bit of the language. Oftentimes someone might say something to me in Blackfoot and I will just respond in English. There's constantly this like movement between English and Blackfoot in the sense that we will connect because most young people are all Blackfoot young people are English speakers first and Blackfoot speakers second.
I'm actually really glad that was brought up. I was kind of thinking the same thing. I think it's so fascinating how, a shared trait between learning languages of all different cultures is that there's kind of like that half and half divvy with the English kind of slipping in there and vice versa. So I find that it's pretty important with the way we're moving now, because even I see my kids using that type of language too, where it's kind of a half and half. Because with my parents, I don't necessarily speak like full Punjabi, but I do. It's like a broken half English, half whatever, you know? I think we'd actually love to learn a little bit about your amazing invention. Do you want to actually let us know what it is and how it came about?
We built a toy, a Blackfoot language reclamation toy designed for little kids. But engineers don't build language reclamation toys. And it's because an engineer only solves problems that they see. And language reclamation, particularly for Blackfoot people, is in their blind spot. If people have been calling it innovative, it's because we solved the problem that was important to us, important to my group. And so, for us, when we were given this assignment of building a toy, really right away we were just like, let's build a toy that teaches kids a language. It's a prairie chicken. And so if you see a prairie chicken, it's actually native to southern Alberta, and it's actually endangered. And so I'm telling you all of this because when we destroyed the buffalo wallows, we by and large destroyed the ecosystem for the prairie chicken. And things like the burrowing owl, all of these are endangered species. We had 6 weeks, and we had to go from nothing to something and a toy. And so we said, well, let's do a language reclamation toy. Let's do a prairie chicken. And we also wanted to give it a personality because we also designed it for kids. We needed it to be visually appealing. And so if you know what a prairie chicken looks like, the greater prairie chicken specifically, you'll notice that it has brown feathers. It has a yellow neck that expands. It dances, and it's very much like that. We use Warhammer paint to paint the 3D printing, and the insides are all done with breadboards and Raspberry Pi microprocessors. It's a very simple machine.
Would you mind showing us how it works?
And so when I turn it on, it'll jump to its first voice.
Hello friends, it's me, Gitoki, the prairie chicken, and today we're going to learn some basic words and phrases in Blackfoot. Are you ready to learn with me? Foot's a foot.
And so it's in demo mode, so it's not going to jump to it. But so the point of what we have is that if it wasn't in demo mode, then it would be listening to me, and then once I stop talking, it'll jump to the first voice memo. And so because it's in a demo mode, I can press the button and jump to the first
one. We say hello in Blackfoot. We say uki. Can you say uki?
That is so cool.
Right.
And so, we definitely took some cues from Dora the Explorer, where it's like, can you, like, hola, can you say whatever, right? And so we also kept it very simple words, like oki means hello, right? That's very much the first language, the first word you learn when you're learning Blackfoot. And so, I have 8. And so they'll just rotate endlessly if I keep pressing this button.
If you want to ask someone's name, you say, Sakadanagoa. Can you say, Sakadanagoa?
And so those are the first 2 things. Hello, what is your name, right? And so it's very much, it's for little kids.
Could you share any stories or experiences from people who have used the toy?
When we built it during the summer months last year, we brought it to the Siksika Board of Education, we brought it to Siksika Administration, we brought it to Siksika Health, and they all flipped. I think, when we brought it to the Board of Education, and maybe at the time, I didn't know exactly how they were going to react. I knew that I liked it, and I like showing it off to people, but their reaction was like my goodness, I could not have gotten a more positive reaction. They were like, you need to start building this. This should be your job, is just building language reclamation toys.
I actually wanted to get your opinion on something. So something I actually read about this morning was, I don't know if you already have any, but I'm assuming you might have some prior knowledge of it. But the virtual reality game Thunder, essentially it was developed by USay Youth for the sake of helping children learn the language and teaching the endangered Blackfoot language specifically to a new generation of learners. And as it's been advertised, it's kind of being called like a mashup of technology and history within the social sphere. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I love it. And so, if you're building something for Blackfoot language and you're telling a story, a Blackfoot folktale, and you're using the Blackfoot language, all of those things, this trifecta of really great stuff to kind of teach the next generation all of these stories. And these stories, too, aren't just stories. Each of them, they tell a different part of the Blackfoot personality, a worldview that can only be told through stories. And I want every organization to be producing this. Hopefully in the future, everybody, people do so much better job than I do that people don't get excited about a chicken that was built by some first year engineering students.
But thank you so much for talking with us today. It was super, I feel like I learned so much, and I feel like it was just a really nice conversation to have.
Yeah, and thank you guys for inviting me and for giving me the ability to show off my chicken. So.
Oh, of course. Love the chicken.
After chatting with Doug, I feel like his invention is innovative. He mentioned that the Blackfoot language used to be limited to ceremonial language or just passed down from parents. But the younger generation of Blackfoot people like Doug himself want to make this language a daily usable language because that way the language can be passed down more easily. So now with his bird toy and the future versions of it, anyone can learn the language very easily and interactively.
Yeah, I think touching on the ceremonial language aspect of it, it's really interesting that when we initially gained interest in the topic, we saw it through a single lens, meaning we focused on exploring the direct translations of words from Blackfoot to English. However, after our conversation with Doug, our understanding of the topic really expanded as we were able to learn about the past, present, and future of the use of Indigenous languages through hearing about his experiences. We were able to connect through the idea that as time goes on, we see a similar trend between all of our languages through the idea of incorporating English words while speaking to develop new slang.
Yeah, his invention is important because there are not many developed language learning tools out there for Indigenous languages. It's not like you can just learn Blackfoot on language apps, I don't think. So I feel like his project set a bright future for preserving the language, and the same technology can be used in preserving other Indigenous languages too. I can definitely see kids buying it from the store in the future.